It took a while, but after a few dozen nights of planning, building, and painting, you have the start of an army you can be proud of. But what now? Hello, my name's Nathaniel, and today I'll be talking about how to expand your army using your own theme and lore as a guide. Oftentimes, that initial hobby rush won't be the end of your project forever, and eventually you're going to want to expand that army and add some cool new models to paint up and show off on the tabletop. But if you're anything like me, not just any old models will do. When I plan for an army addition, I let the lore and theme of the army carry the majority of the decisions for me. I'm not much of a power gamer, so that tends to make things a lot easier, but with a little finagling, I'm sure almost anything can be made to fit your chosen theme. First, let me describe the original theme for my custom Khorne Army for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. In early 2020, I was looking to broaden my gaming horizons, and so I branched out from my usual painting of RPG figures to painting Wargaming models for the first time. I loved the way the Khorne Bloodbound models looked on the Start Collecting box. They looked so brutal and just so much more extreme than the orcs and goblins I'd been working on at the time. I knew I wanted my army to be unique and personal. I didn't want to just copy the models on the box. I was new to the hobby, and I don't think I had even heard the word kitbash yet, and so color palette was going to be my main focus. I got the Khorne Army book and read all the lore sections I could to reap some inspiration. I remember reading one dark story of barbarian tribes cannibalizing defeated enemies to gain strength from their twisted god of blood and violence, Khorne. I was hooked. The lore didn't make this into a huge deal, but the imagery of that scene just stuck with me and it drove the theme forward. I wanted wild barbarian cannibals. And so, armed with a backstory that most likely will be covered in a future video, the Rotheart Ravagers were born. Khorne armies are traditionally red and brass in color scheme, and I decided to keep the brass as I loved the color and was dying to use it on some models. But I wanted to switch the red for a combination of greens and purples to better match a jungle aesthetic I had been playing with. I wanted the Ravagers to be dripping blood from their hands and their mouths to display their dark hunger, and eventually I got them all painted and I loved them. About a year passed and many other projects cycled through my hobby desk, but I did eventually come back to my first army. I wanted to do more. Khorne armies in the game mechanics of Age of Sigmar can summon demons forth from the spilling of blood in the middle of a battle, a kind of boon from the blood god. I wanted to have these summonable units to play with, but there was one major problem. I just didn't care for the miniatures. They look fine as demons go, but I just couldn't see them matching my army theme. A heavy metal album, absolutely, but for the Rotheart Ravagers, I wanted something a little different. That's when I decided. The blood will call the beasts.
The jungle stirs always. 3 days we've been cutting through the Southlands on Garash's orders. He was right. They have grown fat and weak from good harvest. Now it is our time to reap. At first, we only heard them at night, as the campfires roared and the smoke of our meat filled the air. We thought nothing of it. The jungle stirs always. Then, we saw the shapes following behind us as we left the fields of battle, victorious and full. Skulking among the trees they were. We knew we could slaughter any that dared to face us. We cared not for their shadow, for the jungle always stirs. Today they came, as my axe cleaved the first meal of the day. As he screamed, they burst from their hidden places and charged. But not for us. As the fools broke and fled in their new terror, the creatures pursued with great speed and ferocity. Much meat that would have slipped from our grasp was laid low. The creatures ate, but not greedily. We all filled our bellies that day. Garrosh will be pleased, for our new friends are just as eager as we to please the hungering god hidden in the trees. The blood of the Southlanders will run cold as they remember. The jungle stirs always.
I wanted beastmen. It just matched perfectly for me. My first instinct was to go to the Games Workshop Beasts of Chaos line, but those models looked a little too retro for my taste, so I went to Etsy instead. If you don't have a 3D printer, it is an incredibly easy way to get your hands on all sorts of crazy cool minis shipped straight to your door. With my new shipment, I had a pile of 3D printed beasties to proxies in for my demons. A free pig for learning how to airbrush, a pig and cart combo that will serve as my skull cannon and blood throne, half horses to replace blood crushers, these good boys for the flesh hounds, and this pile of goat men for bloodletters. Last but certainly not least, I have this massive beast to replace the flagship demon of Khorne, the Bloodthirster. While you don't have to cut these models out of a sprue, there is still some cleanup to do. Mostly breaking off the bits that shouldn't be connected, and also cutting off these strange rectangular growths that sprout up everywhere. Once those were clean enough for my taste, I got them ready for their correct base sizes. I checked with the Games Workshop guide, and these wooden bases were much cheaper and matched perfectly. I had a little trouble getting the small connection of the beastmen to hold with glue, but a brand new set of green stuff socks gave the superglue plenty of surface to stick to. I used some rocks and some torn up corkboard along with a healthy spread of some texture paste to add height variety and texture to my bases, and once that was finished drying, I got out my airbrush. A rattle can will work just as well, but I live in Georgia where there's only 2 days a year that match optimal priming conditions. I primed them a basic matte black and then gave them a quick zenithal highlight with some white ink to see how light would fall. For the regular beastmen, I wanted a basic skin and hair tone that separated itself from the rest of my army. I chose a dark brownish gray that I would eventually work up to a light gray and then to a pure white at the mains. I thought this would be relatively quick to do in batches for the 20 goatmen I had to paint, and I was wrong. I truly believe I took every opportunity I had to make this process go as slow as possible. Learn from my mistakes. Plan out your painting so you don't have to redo or touch up or use careful brushstrokes on all of your batch painting group. The closest I came to the speed painting I had in mind was when I used contrast paints on all the bones and horns, but even that need plenty of additional work to get right. I used the same colors I used for my Rotheart Ravagers to connect the two groups visually. A purplish magenta color for the wraps, a lighter brown for the leathers, and a dark green for tabards and standards. I then grabbed my favorite color of the scheme, a nice brassy metal, for all the non-blade metallics. I used a rough and chunky gunmetal gray to cover my axe blades to give them a tough and beaten appearance. I gave the model a nice thorough coat of a dark brown wash to give definition and a general dirty look, like one would expect from jungle-dwelling monsters. I threw a coat of forest green for the base and then dry brushed an off-white into the mains to bring back that brighter shade I had in mind. After a quick and dirty highlight, taking the base colors from all of the palette and mixing it with my white, adding in some silver metallic dry brush to the metals and some painted plant life to liven up the base, I was ready for the blood. I matched the scheme of my Rothearts and had blood on the weapons and dripping down from the mouth. My beastman was now finished. Now just to do 19 more. For my flesh hounds, I sprayed a base coat of dark green. Another time-costing mistake. If I had painted my flesh tone that covers the beasties' bellies first, I wouldn't have had to spend so much time painting those hard-to-reach areas and avoiding all the areas that actually needed to be green. I sprayed a nice coat from my bright magenta color down the back to add a splash of color. I painted up the horns and the large spine going down the back in a dark khaki, and then I painted my pale flesh tone on all of those hard to reach places. I then washed all of the skin to give a more alive warmth to the color, and then a once over wash of dark brown to add that dirty definition I wanted. But the skin needed some touching up after all the darkening down. A bright highlight of that original flesh tone followed by another flesh wash leaves a pretty good contrast while still looking relatively cohesive. A dab of white to help a coat of bright yellow for the eyes finish up the face, and then just a dry brush up with the purple, green, and bone. Finish up the basing, paint the rim, and it's finally done. 30 minis finished. I can now go back to fix some casualties of my rush. These minis are great, but a bit more fragile than most. I managed to break off an axe head from this beastman and just absolutely destroyed one of these flesh hounds by dropping it. Luckily, this is just some advanced weathering techniques. I clipped the axe blade nub and the handle and cut down what I could. I then painted a glob of blood over the lump to look like our bestial warrior has torn a nice chunk of viscera from his foe. Lucky over here got a very similar treatment. I superglued back what structural instability there was, making sure to spread some of the fresh glue into lumps down the leg, and a coat of blood effect, and now those lumps look like the remains of flesh from a vicious wound that already took the other leg. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how the project turned out. I wasted a lot of time being inefficient, enough so that I'll most likely have to paint the bigger guys in their own video down the line. It was a long journey, but I have 30 more minis to join the growing horde of the Rotheart Ravagers. This was Punic Painting, and I want to thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please do all the usual YouTube stuff if you liked what you saw, and let me know down in the comments your own idea for themes. I'd love to hear them. I'm experimenting with doing some more narrative elements like the one in this video, as lore and backstory are some of my favorite aspects of the hobby. I'll be trying to get these videos out at a quicker pace in the future, and I already have some plans for the next couple videos. Till then, have a good one.